Hey guys, it's Sean here from Micro Budget Film Lab. And today I wanted to start talking about story. We've done a lot of work on character and the relationship of character to story and the transformation of character and how that transformation traces a thematic argument or demonstrates a thematic argument. And hopefully you've been able to do that work and get really inside the skin of your character and to understand them and think about the ways they walk and talk and all that stuff. And now I think we want to move on to actually constructing coherent story elements in order to construct, to trace that arc and how they go through the steps on that journey of self-actualization, of transformation, or not. They could avoid being transformed and fail to fulfill the potential of the thematic argument and so on. So when I approach this process, I do two things really when I reach this stage, often simultaneously, but sometimes one before the other, and I'll move back and forth between them if I have unclarity. And one of those acts to provide me with plot points without necessarily putting them in the exact order in which they come, but gives me ideas about how to realize those plot points. And the other lays them out in a more systematic fashion, taking account of rising action and moving sort of through the story linearly, or not necessarily linearly because not all my stories are linear, but at least knowing where things occur in a term, kind of cause and effect, kind of way. So getting the causality down. So the first one I want to talk about, because I don't want to lump them both together because I already do videos that are way too long, and I'll try to keep this one relatively brief, is using Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Now, you probably have heard about Joseph Campbell, or maybe not, but he's kind of a big deal in terms of storytelling and in terms of mythology. He was a comparative literature professor who passed away in 1990, I believe, and his most famous book was The Hero with a Thousand Faces, in which he argues for the first time, I think, his central argument, which is that there's a monomyth. The idea that behind all these masks, the masks of God, as he calls them in another collection of books, and also it's the name of a PBS series, I believe, that you can find on YouTube. It's worth actually looking it up. It's good to see it. His argument is that behind all these regional and historical variations, there is a kind of a monomyth, a singular myth that is united by a general arc of self-discovery or spiritual discovery or discovery of the mysteries and so on. And I think there's controversy about this, and a lot of folklorists and I think anthropologists disagree with him. I think oftentimes, and I'm no Campbell expert, or nor a folklorist nor an anthropologist. And it's true, people like Campbell and Carl Jung, who was a student of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychiatry, whichever it was, psychotherapy. Carl Jung, he was a student of his, but moved away from sexuality as a sort of central, the development of sexuality as the kind of central pivot or axis upon which human personality developed, and instead moved towards an idea of archetypes, which heavily influenced Jung. Was this idea that there were common experiences that were represented through mythical symbolism, and that could go in kind of two directions. Jung was briefly sympathetic to the Nazis, for instance, who were all about mythology and the mythos of the Aryan and so on. But it can also be taken. I think some people want to throw it out completely and take it and just ignore it. But I think there's something valuable, and specifically for screenwriting, there's something valuable if we understand that there are commonalities in certain experiences. We're all born, we all die. We all have to eat. We all go through. There's a common process of learning. In the sense that at first we're novices, and we're not, we discover something, or we're put in a situation of having to learn something, and at first we suck at it, and then through a series of increasingly difficult challenges, as we increase our proficiency, we become experts at something if we stick with it long enough, and we have the ability or the aptitude for those things. So there are those kinds of common experiences that sort of unite us as humans, even though they are different, obviously, across historical periods and across cultures. Chinese culture has different reference points than, say, Western culture, which is heavily influenced by, the Christian religion, Judeo-Christianity, Muslim Christianity, kind of epistemology or ways of philosophically of viewing the world and of viewing the ethics and God and mysticism and everything else. The experience of living under modern industrial society, capitalist society, is different than under, say, agricultural society, which tended to be more cyclical, and so stories tended to be more heavily cyclical, even though those continue to influence us. So this is a long kind of segue, as I'm prone to take, into saying, take this stuff critically, understand that things change across time or whatever, but nonetheless there are some really useful common elements, and the framework, especially because Campbell's work has become so predominant in thinking about storytelling in general and screenwriting in particular. A lot of people have read books. There's the various books. I haven't read them. It doesn't really interest me, and I don't feel like I need them for this, what I'm going to talk about here. And in general, I think a lot of what happens is people are trying to sell books, and so they come up with their own special sauce, their own way of, I've got the special way of thinking about this. I don't think you need it. It's useful to read Campbell to understand what he's talking about, or to even watch the videos that I mentioned, the Masks of God series on YouTube. It's useful to understand the categories that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to go through them all in detail because, again, that would take too many hours. In fact, you can go to Wikipedia. There's a good Wikipedia page for the hero's journey that explains all of the steps of the hero's journey, that also talks about, I think it talks about the different ways that, that there's a book, I think, called The Artist's Journey, that uses Joseph Campbell, but uses different categories and like these different approaches to writing that have changed the categories a little bit to make them better in some way than Campbell had originally used them. But that article actually is really good, just explaining each of those steps. And so I'll just talk about a couple of the key ones that I think. But it's useful to know those in the general sense and to be able to recognize those in other stories, because then when you get stuck, when you're trying to create your chronology, your arc of causality, that is your story, moving from lower level stuff to higher level stuff as you create that sort of rising action, sometimes you get stuck. But what you're supposed to do, you can refer to the hero's journey, and you can look through it and say, okay, well, have I got the road of trials? Have I got the meeting with the goddess? Have I got the refusal of the return? All these kinds of things that are potential plot points that can guide you in finding those missing elements so that you don't have the second act problems. And as I say, I often will do the two hand in hand, or I'll go to the hero's journey first because I've got a bunch of jumbled ideas in my head, and I'll start to put them down and see where they slot in, because our thinking about story has been shaped so profoundly by Campbell, whether it is historically purely accurate or not. And you can also, I think, find ways to be engaged with it critically. It's very gender stereotypical in the way that it's laid out. The woman as the temptress as opposed to man as the tempter. Meeting with the goddess as opposed to meeting with the god. Atonement with the father instead of atonement with the mother. You can reverse those. You can find different. You can play with them. So don't think that you have to just take them as given. You can change them, but they do provide something very useful. But I think that just to talk a little bit about the worksheet, basically what it does is it breaks it down into three parts. The retreat from the world, which is when the hero sallies forth, or the heroine sallies forth, leaves their common everyday life, what they've done on a day-to-day basis, whether that's be a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a car salesman, or they were an assassin, a space pirate, or whatever. Whatever their everyday life is, they're going to retreat from the world that has been their normal life and go on this adventure. And then the second part is the trials and the victories of initiation, which is kind of like when they're learning to become proficient at something, that process of going from novice to expert. and ultimately as they go through that process in the end to reach the climax, or the apotheosis as it's called, and to get the treasure, get the gold at the end, whatever that happens to be, whether it's internal, external, or generally a mix of the two things, that you get the internal treasure as a prelude and precondition of getting winning the gold in the outside world. And the third part, which is the hero returns. And not every story has to have all of these. Most of them don't. So don't feel like you need to put them all in there. But again, they are useful as guides. Now, some of them that are really common and typical that is worth keeping in mind are things like the call to adventure. The call to adventure is usually the hero or heroine is exposed to the possibility of going on some sort of adventure. If you think of the Matrix, for instance, when Neo is told to follow the White Rabbit, and before he's told to follow the White Rabbit, when he's at work and he gets a call from Morpheus telling him to go out on the window ledge, to escape the Agent Smith, and he goes out on the window ledge, or he's told to go out on the window ledge, and then he refuses to go out on the window ledge. That's the refusal of the call. So he gets the call to adventure, go out on the window ledge. It's literally a call. And then he refuses the call. He refuses to, he turns away from the possibility of going that adventure. And so you'll see this typically in many stories, that there is the opportunity presents itself, and at first the hero or heroine is reluctant to take on that opportunity, to take on that challenge for all kinds of reasons, because it's scary, because it goes against their beliefs, because they're too busy, whatever it happens to be. And then they receive some kind of, something happens, supernatural aid, which I think can be both positive and negative, that pushes them along the way. In fact, the Matrix is it's useful to go through the Matrix and see so many of these categories are in the Matrix. It really does follow this model. I would be very surprised if the Wachowskis didn't use Joseph Campbell in constructing their script as they wrote it. So the supernatural aid can be both positive and negative. It could be, a wizard comes down and kills the family of the heroine, and so now she has to go and do battle with the evil emperor. And in fact, that's what happens in Star Wars, isn't it? Luke Skywalker delivers the message to Obi-Wan, and his family, his aunt and uncle, are murdered, and so he can't just return home to his normal life. He has to go on this journey which ultimately leads to him destroying the Death Star. But that's the supernatural aid, is the power that comes from above, and then he crosses the first threshold, which is like the fourth point. So you begin to see how these things play out. It's useful to practice them when you're watching some movies. Just sit there with a paper in front of you and note them down as you see them in the movie. If you're watching the movie with somebody with whom you're in quarantine, or you're having like a simultaneous movie viewing date with somebody on Zoom or on Google Hangouts or whatever, you can go through these together to get good at recognizing how these things happen. I used to teach a course on myth at a college in Toronto, and we would do it with Sinbad, one of the old Sinbad movies where they had those skeletons that were I don't know if they were plasticine or whatever, hilarious stuff. And we would do it with that, because Sinbad is obviously kind of a very mythical, magical story, and go through. And so things would appear. You had to be creative in approaching these things. The woman as temptress might not even be a person. It could just be, wealth. It could be fame. Instead of pursuing the path towards justice, they pursue the path towards public recognition. That is the temptation that they face. So don't take it too literally, and find ways to use it creatively and critically. And it can be, as I say, I find it incredibly useful. I just did, I've mentioned this a few times, I've been working on this rewrite of a children's project, screenplay, and I have gone through these stages. I'm still going through them, because every stage requires revision and revisiting and editing and so on. I'm still at the beat sheet stage several weeks later on this project, but I used first the Truby spreadsheet that I've uploaded onto the Facebook page for One Room Masterpieces, And I also have used the hero's journey and the beat sheet that's taken from the Blake Snyder Save the Cat beat sheet that I use. And I have I went through the hero's journey and I wrote down a bunch of ideas of things that could work in the course of the journey that the character goes on, and then I began to transpose them into the causality sheet, the beat sheet. So I hope you find it useful. I'm going to upload it also to the Facebook page for you to use. And if you have any questions about any aspect of Joseph Campbell, well, I'm not a Joseph Campbell expert, then Google it or watch the YouTube videos. But I'm happy to talk about, if there's a misunderstanding about, what's in the belly of the whale, or what's the magic flight, or rescue from without, or whatever. We can jam on those. So have a great day, and I hope you're moving forward with your stories and beginning to construct as we go on this quarantine journey, and we can do the hero's journey in the quarantine. The refusal of the call, the refusal to wear the mask, and to go into their house and hiding, and then the supernatural aid is the police come in and give you a fine, and so you're forced to go home and hide out and cross the first threshold of locking your door and pulling your blinds shut, and then you're trapped in the belly of the whale. Whatever. Anyway, have a great day. Talk to you soon.